This for my dogs from the east to the west side. You rockin' brown and orange with me, baby, let's ride. Represent the land, let them know. Tell them, here we go, brownies, here we go. Yeah, here we go.
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of the Here We Go Brownies podcast. I'm Allie Heisong, coming at you live from Sneads Ferry, North Carolina. Joined with me in the 216, we've got Dustin.
I know.
Dustin, what's going on?
I feel like I felt like I had to just represent 216 today. We'll talk about this, but man, how about those Cleveland Guardians? Best home record in baseball. I got to go over to the games this weekend, putting 11 runs on the board, 6 in a row for this team. They're just fun to watch. These guys are really gelling. We're having guys come up from AAA and they're still producing. This is just a fun team to watch. The weather, like it was 90 here yesterday. By the way, Allie, they call this in Cleveland patio season. Everybody's out on the patios. They enjoy the restaurants in downtown Cleveland. So it's beautiful here. I'm starting to feel that humidity that I'm not used to. I can start to feel that thickness in the air. I'm like, here it comes. I come from a lot of people know I come from Idaho where it gets real hot, but zero humidity. So this is going to be a flip of the switch for me to go from no humidity to lots of humidity this summer. And by the way, I felt it last summer at training camp and the training camp before. It gets thick in August, and it's but you're from the Carolinas. You're in the Carolinas.
Look, born and raised in Northeast Ohio, and then down in the Carolinas since that point. And I'm just throwing myself into it even more. We're going to Florida, so it's just you know what? I thrive off of humidity. I was going to say
that's a little worse. And by the way, Allie, this will make you laugh. I went out to the beach, and the sun was setting, and I wasn't used to this. And I went down to the beach this last weekend, and I had my mouth open. And all of a sudden, just like normal, not like wide open, and all these bugs from the lake kind of like came in my mouth. And I'm like, what is going? And it's like, it's that time of the year where, that sunset and all the bugs come out. And I'm like, it was like,
what are you doing? Just walking down Lake Erie open mouthed?
No, I went to Huntington Beach out by Bay Village out that way. I was just, but I looked in the sunset and I could see that there was like thousands of like little bugs, like flies or whatever, like. That was like because of the water, right? Because it attracts.
You're just watching the sun's out, mouth agape. I mean, I can just see you standing there, just like, what are you doing? If bugs are going in your mouth.
No, I was walking down the stairs, and there was a whole bunch of bugs. Just like.
Oh, that's funny.
But
I mean, look, it's happened to all of us. They're nasty. This time of year, it's just that was funny.
I couldn't even
those little.
Yes, that's it. And that's the other thing. I couldn't see them, so I'm like, what is in my mouth? Like there's bugs just coming at me like left and right, and then people are like, oh yeah, you're supposed to keep your mouth shut when you're down by here because it's like bugs come out. I'm like, all right, fair enough.
That or they just don't want to hear what you have to say. Could be both.
Could be both. That's probably true.
What else you got going on? I heard you finished a race.
Did the marathon here in Cleveland. Didn't do my best time, but I did it. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, that's great.
And so I've been working out, and Allie, you'll appreciate this. I'm going to go do one the weekend after David Njoku's softball game, which is, by the way, everybody, June 8th. There's one on June 9th. It's Wine and Run. You do a 5K at a winery, and you go to a winery. And at the end of the 5K, you get to have wine. So I was like, that'd be kind of fun, and you get a medal. So I'm going to go do that one.
I'd be terrified. I would throw up. You're running and then you're drinking. Not a good combination for Allie Heisong. I'll stick to the wine. I'll do that. I'll partake. Having a nice glass of Vino Verde tonight out of Portugal. So quite nice. Guys, look, it is a.
As I say, speaking of our good friend Larry, he is in Italy, and so speaking of wineries, he's over there for a week. On business in Italy. I'm like, you know what? I've never been to Italy, but it intrigues me. It looks like it'd be a fun country to visit.
Yeah. Good food, good drinks, good views.
Have you been to Italy?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
It's kind of on my bucket list. It seems like one of those places that would be a lot of fun to go to.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of the Here We Go Brownies podcast. This is the off season where there's not a lot to talk about. So you're
there is, but there isn't. There is, but there isn't.
So we kind of have to, we got to put some filler in, have a little BS on these shows to fill some time. But nonetheless, it's going to be a good show tonight. We are going to continue the last portion of our game of Did Andrew Berry Get It Right? We're going to finish up with the 2022 draft class. And just a reminder what that is, we go through and we look at the player that he drafted, and then we look at the next player at that position that was drafted by another team, and we compare the two. Basically, did Andrew Berry get it right out of who else was left on the board? So
right.
With that, we're going to talk OTAs, we're going to talk schedule. We'll have David on to talk about some medical things. He knows it better than we do. So it is going to be a fun show, but guys, if there's anything you want us to cover, any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to drop them in the comments. These off-season shows are the best to get your questions answered, be live on the program with us, interacting. So we ask that you do that if you've got anything for us. Before we kick it off, Dustin, why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit about what's going on with Teresa's Pizza?
Yeah, guys, if you haven't had Teresa's Pizza, it's been a Cleveland icon since 1969. Check out their locations in University Heights or Mayfield Heights. And guess what? It's a 3-day weekend coming up, Memorial Day weekend. You got plans? You're not going to barbecue every day of the week, right? If you want to get some pizza, they're even open on Memorial Day. But check out both of their locations in Mayfield Heights or University Heights. It's great pizza. Love it. I've had it multiple times. Ali, he actually made a pizza recently for us that actually was cauliflower crust. So it was like a low-carb pizza. It was really good. It was really good. Yeah. And it was thin, so it wasn't really heavy. So they have all different kinds of options. If you're gluten-free, you need a gluten-free option. They have that as well. So check out both their locations.
Yeah. Let's talk OTAs. Voluntary OTAs have started. So, of course, with that, again, emphasis on voluntary. Myles Garrett, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, some of the big name players that were not at OTAs. Deshaun Watson is there, and he'll be throwing every other day. First off, let's start with this. I know my answer. I have a feeling I know your answer, but let's talk about it. Your thoughts on some of these bigger names not being there at these voluntary OTAs?
I think they're saving their body, quite honestly. Like Myles Garrett, that's how I feel it is. Like it is, again, it is optional. It's not, it's not, they don't have to be there. For someone like Deshaun Watson, clearly coming off an injury, I think he feels like he needs to be there to get more reps in. That just makes sense. But at the end of the day, these other guys, I mean, Cooper and Myles Garrett are the best at their positions, right? So at the end of the day, it's the same way I feel about preseason football, right? Like how many games do you need to get warmed up to be ready and not risk injury, right? And those kind of things. We'll get into this at some point, Ali, but I want to talk about, the actual Roger Goodell floating the 18-game season out there and, the 2 buys and stuff like that, and maybe doing away from preseason almost altogether, right? So, again, I think this ties into that. Like, hey, I'm not going to go out there and do what I know I got to do anyway. I can go train by myself individually and be just fine and be ready to go. So I will say this, though. I took the beard off this week, and I thought it was funny that Smith came into training camp with not, the whole big hair, and everybody's like, Zary Smith completely shaved his head. And I thought it was funny. He goes, well, why did you do that? He goes, my family and my wife said I looked old. So he wanted a clean, younger look. So I was like, I was going to take it. I didn't do it for that, but I thought it was funny that correlated with me completely shaving off my beard this week. So it's like, but yeah, he looked fresh and clean out there, with the rookies and some of the other defensive linemen. I'm excited for this defense. A lot of people say, can the Browns repeat what they did last year? But I'll tell you this, I saw some rankings that has the Browns, like it went by a position group in the National Football League, and it had the Browns ranked number 1 in defensive line among all those groups. So I expect a lot out of this group this year. And is it hard to replicate number 1 defense 2 years in a row? Of course it is, but top 5, 6, I don't see why that can't be accomplished with this group of people that we have. So it'll be exciting. But no, for these guys to miss camp, Myles Garrett's done this before, and he comes in and he's just fine, and he still, blocks field goals in Indianapolis, knocks quarterbacks out. I mean, it doesn't change his game. So.
No, and that's my answer. Like, who cares, right?
Right.
You see these headlines, oh, these big time players aren't there. Well, I probably wouldn't be either. If I
Right.
am at my job and they're like, hey, this is optional, I'm not going. If I don't have to. So no, I don't think that's any big deal, especially these big time players that have done it. These are veterans. They know what they're doing. They're preserving their bodies. They are probably training harder at their own facilities or wherever they're at than they would be like David Njoku.
Right. Exactly. That guy's putting in 7 hours, right? Like we know he's putting the time in, right?
Yes.
So, and also I think you can focus more on your technique and your individual skills, right? If you're kind of got a guy you're working one-on-one with, then drill. And I'm not taking away anything from OTAs, but I'm just saying when these guys want to be elite players, sometimes they just, do elite things. I'm assuming LeBron James trains the same way in the offseason, right? He's very focused individually doing his own thing so he can be the best player he can be when he gets on the court. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, OTAs, voluntary workouts, things of that nature are absolutely crucial for rookies and absolutely crucial for depth guys, right? Those that are maybe fighting for a roster spot. Not only think of it as a networking opportunity. If you're kind of not in the best, best with your company and you're going to a conference, you might be doing some networking, some things like that. That's what this is. A lot of these guys are getting some things on tape. They're reviewing film. They're getting in contact with their position coaches. I mean, this is all networking. It's a really good opportunity for them to get their name out there further and also get in shape, get familiar with the coaches here, try to impress. Absolutely crucial for those guys that are fighting for a roster spot, most definitely. But I want to go back to that. Can this defense repeat? Good question. What do you think? You think they can? So here's my take. If you're, let's just say, the number one defense in the NFL, that's great. That's a great thing for pride, talking points, of course. But what's the gap really between the number one overall defense in the NFL and the number 2 or 3 overall defense in the NFL? I think if you're top 5, that is a solid thing to work with. But yeah, I think that the Browns absolutely can be a top 5 defense. They should be a top 5 defense. They're returning just about everybody, right? With some additions to this defense. I mean, yeah, they're going to be quicker. They should be better, faster, stronger. And this is the second year now in the scheme of Jim Schwartz. Should be more comfortable, more gelled, more just overall more comfortable with themselves together as players, but overall in the scheme.
Yeah, and for me, it's something that we talked about 4 years ago now on the show, and that's culture, right? They have set the bar high now as a defense, right? We were the number 1 defense in the National Football League. So when we roll out in 2024, Schwartz's group has that, hey, we are that good, right? You have that. Now we have set a standard on that side of the ball that when people play us, we're going to be a tough out. By the way, you're probably not going to beat us at home, right? And we're going to be tough on the road too, because defense travels, right? So yes, I think this is something where Schwartz has set that bar when he came in last year as the new head coach on defense. We saw immediately the changes, how he changed up the way the philosophy went in that room. And I think, for the offense, that is the challenge, right? Look, we know what this offense is capable of, so they need to step up to the next level and be more of a, elite offense. But I look at it this way. Everybody said the Kansas City Chiefs could not repeat based on what they did the year before. Well, guess what they came into? They came into that season knowing that they were the defending champions, and they had to defend that place where they were in the National Football League. Same thing with the Browns defense. They have to come in this year saying, yes, we are the number 1 defense. We left the end of the season as the number 1 defense. And by the way, that's the standard that we hold here as Cleveland Browns with this defense, with the elite players that we have on defense. And we're going to keep that standard up. So I think that culture change is the biggest piece of this, where I think they can repeat. Again, you bring up a good point. How they rank defenses, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's maybe 30 or 40 yards difference, like in the big scheme of things. Top 5 defense, yes, this team can be another top 5 defense this year. I have no issue with that. And I actually have very much a lot of confidence that this team will be able to do that, because they did that last year in spite of injuries. This team had injuries on defense, and they were still flipping number 1. So the challenge to me is Deshaun Watson needs to be the guy we signed him for all that guaranteed money this year, the guy that he was in Houston. And these receivers, the Tillmans and the other guys of the world, need to step up. And Jerry Jeudy needs to have the type of season that we think he can. And the offense now needs to come up to that level or close to that level where the defense is. That's where I think we're at as a football team.
Well, if the Browns have any aspirations of being a Super Bowl caliber team, which they are, right? We know that, which they are. They have to be a top 5 defense. I mean, you have to be. Yes, you have a ton of skill position talent offensively. You've got a good quarterback. Can we say he's elite yet? No, we haven't seen that in a Browns uniform. We haven't. He needs to get there. We know he can get there, but we're waiting on that. Running back, we know we got it, assuming Nick comes back pretty close to health.
When that is, right, yeah.
Receiving room, right here, right now, all in, pretty damn good group, including David Njoku. I mean, offensive line, you feel really good about that, assuming everybody's healthy, right? There's a lot of what ifs as it pertains to the offense still. And it all depends on Deshaun Watson, because there is still that one question mark, the question mark, as it pertains to this entire Browns team. The Browns, we all have to put our trust and focus and energy into this defense. The defense has to be the solid. They have to be the foundation. We have to be good offensively, of course. But if the defense sucks, man, it can't keep up with anybody. I mean, just look at the schedule. Let's go through it. You open at home with the Dallas Cowboys. I'm glad that you're getting the Cowboys early on rather than late. I think that's prime. That's very opportunistic for the Browns to come away with a win at home to start the season. But look, let's go through this. Then you go to Jacksonville. Pretty darn good team there. You host the Giants. Some question marks there. At Raiders. At Commanders. At Eagles. Host the Bengals, host the Ravens, host the Chargers, at the Saints. That's the day after I get married, so that'll be cool. Host the Steelers, go to Denver. Prime time, go to Denver, go to Pittsburgh, host the Chiefs late in the season. In December, you're hosting the Kansas City Chiefs. It's a 1:00 kick. Then you go to Cincinnati.
Two cold weather teams, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be quite a game. Then you go to Cincinnati, host the Dolphins. I mean, you like having the Dolphins. In Cleveland in December. You like that. And then you end with the Ravens. So you have to rely on this defense to be who they were, if not better. I mean, look at some of these offenses you're going up against. The Chiefs, the Dolphins. I mean, we know the Steelers are going to be better this year. The Ravens, the Eagles, the Bengals. I mean, yeah, you have to have it.
And even the Chargers, I think, will be a better football team.
Even the Chargers, yep.
Yeah, under Harbaugh will be a better football team. Allie, my big question is, that'll be September. You will have been moved to Florida. Will you be attending the Jacksonville Jaguars game? You're going to be on the upper panhandle there, right? Can't be that far away, right?
I actually don't know how far it is. It's
to me like
let me map this out.
To me, that game manifested itself when I saw that. I'm like, okay, Allie moving to the panhandle of Florida, Jacksonville week 2.
It's still 5 hours away. Like that's a 5-hour drive.
You've driven further for less. You've driven. You've driven further for less.
I have, and I've also driven a U-Haul back to my house because I couldn't get a rental car. So you know what? I'm resourceful, so we can make things happen.
I remember that, and I remember the show that we had to do that week. You were a wreck because if I remember right,
exhausted.
Didn't you have to go to somebody's house to get the?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
That's right. Just a quick story because we have time on that. So what happened was I was back-to-back work trips. I was flying from San Diego back home to Myrtle Beach. And then 3 days later, I was going to turn around and go to New York City. So I had to be home in this amount of time to get Birdie. She was at daycare. I had to get her. Didn't have anybody else that I could rely on to go get her.
There was no David at this point.
There was no David at this point. So I fly from San Diego to Charlotte, get stranded in Charlotte. It's 4:00 in the morning. I can't get a hotel. There's no rental cars, nothing. So I wait a couple hours. There's no rental cars. I can't find anything. There's tornadoes or something. So everybody was grounded. Everybody had already decided to rent cars before I thought of it. So I thought, okay, what can I do? So I rented a 10-foot box truck from U-Haul, except I had to get a 40-minute Uber ride to somewhere in North Carolina. And I'm assuming it's going to be a U-Haul store. You know how you go in the U-Haul center? Wrong. It was some man's house. And I had to go knock on his door. He did have a U-Haul in his front yard. So I went and knocked on his door and said, "Is that yours?" He said, "Yeah, you want the keys?" And I took it and I drove to Myrtle Beach and I got Birdie. It was one of the craziest things I've ever done, but I did it, and I lived to tell the tale by the grace of God.
Well, I had to a couple years ago in Cleveland because rental cars were crazy because right after COVID, and I remember coming to Cleveland and I could not find a rental car to save my life, or if I wanted, it was like stupid amounts of money for a rental car. So I rented a U-Haul truck here in Cleveland for $20 a day because I wasn't going very far. And
yours was an actual pickup truck, which was ideal for that situation. I was in a moving truck. I think I needed my CDL. I shouldn't have been able to drive this thing. Actually, I'm just kidding. It was only 10 foot, but it was a crazy story, and it didn't have AC, and it was in like July. It was terrible.
Ooh, you did. I don't remember that part. But
Tough. Guys, if you don't have Stadium Mustard in your kitchen this season, you are doing it wrong. The iconic brand, the iconic taste, beloved from ballparks to backyards and everywhere in between. Stadium Mustard is a smooth brown mustard rich in both taste and tradition. By the way, loved by millions, so be sure to head on over to stadiummustard.com to shop now. Before we bring on David, we're going to have a quick word from our friends over at Lorello Vineyards.
Here we go, Brownies. Here we go. Woof, woof.
Hello, welcome to Lorello Vineyards, Larry and Kim Lorello. We have a beautiful Here We Go Brownies wine that we would like to offer to you this season as we did last season. We have several other award-winning wines, lovely entertainment and events coming this summer. So come and see us, wine a bit, you'll feel better.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing you at the Muni lot this fall. Go Browns.
All right, and with that, let's go out on the line and bring on Dr. David Ullery to the program. David, what's going on?
Hello. Good evening. Not a lot. Allie and Dustin, how are you guys?
David, I have a question. Is that Appalachian State, that hat?
It is indeed.
I knew it. I was like, I knew that A. All right.
It's actually the Allie Heisong hat. That's A for Allie.
Oh boy. Boy, you just opened Pandora's box.
So honestly, David, like a little bit rude that you said it was App State. It's Allie. David, are you having a glass of Vino Verde with me?
I am, in fact.
What do you think of this? Quite nice.
Pretty good. Yeah, I would have gone great
nice.
with the sushi earlier.
Yeah, we didn't think to have that. We stuffed our faces with sushi. Probably. What time did the show start? 8 o'clock. I got in here and sat down at 7:54, I think. So I was absolutely stuffed and had to find some room to be able to talk football, talk in general. But we absolutely stuffed our face. We rushed. David was down at the condo doing some work. So it's been a chaotic day in the Heisery household. But let's get into it. David, last week we had the question, can you talk about turf toe? Can you talk about grass versus turf? As we know, in Cleveland, we're working with grass, but in a lot of other stadiums, MetLife, for example, we know what they've got going on and just a plethora of injuries that come out of that stadium. Let's talk about it, kind of the benefits, if you will, and turf toe. I'd like to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, the turf versus grass conversation can be pretty complex, and truthfully, we could probably spend an entire hour talking about just that and kind of the recent developments. But before I get into that, I'll start with turf toe, since that was the question posed in the show last week. Apologies if you can hear Birdie. She decided to start barking right now as I started talking.
Yep.
So turf toe, as it implies, is an injury to a toe, typically from turf. Pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially when there's a hyperextension injury to the big toe at the metatarsal phalangeal joint, which is the joint between sort of the midfoot and the forefoot, between the metatarsal, the big bone, and the phalanx, or the next bone just after it. Essentially, if what happens is it's a non-contact injury usually, but it can happen from contact too, and the foot kind of gets planted down like this, and the foot gets stuck in the turf and the rest of the body bends forward. Right. And imagine that joint kind of hyperextends. So it'd just be like kind of a finger hyperextending at this joint here. Or
So David, is it hyperextend at the top of the foot where it meets the, you know what I mean? Does it hyperextend up that area?
No. So it's at the joint between like the foot. This is my hand. Right. Between the foot and
that's like your big toe. That's your big
joint,
toe.
Yeah. So it'd be at this joint right here, but on the foot. So
okay. So I see you're saying it kind of. I see. Yeah.
And so essentially that toe just hyperextends, and there's something called the plantar plate, which is the joint capsule and the thick tissue that connects those two bones together and helps protect the joint, and that tears. And so what happens is you get pain, you get swelling, you get stiffness. But part of the other issue with it is a bunch of the tendons of that toe, the big toe, the flexor tendons, attached to these two small bones that are just underneath that joint called the sesamoid bones. And those tendons and bones can become damaged too. Sometimes those bones fracture, sometimes the tendons pull off the bones. And so it's more than just the joint capsule being injured, but a number of other structures around it being injured. But basically what it boils down to is you get pain if you try to recreate hyperextension. And one of the things that happens when you try to push off, when you're driving your feet, when you're running, is extension of those joints. And so you can't do that. Like it's almost impossible to do it because of pain. And so even though it's, you think it's such a small joint and such a small issue, and it's called turf toe, like it can't be that bad, it can actually be pretty significant, pretty detrimental. The first attempt at treating these is non-operatively, even if it's a complete tear. But sometimes that can take 2, 3, 4, even up to 6 weeks of immobilization in a boot, or sometimes even in a cast, and sort of a gradual return to activity, because you got to get that tissue to kind of heal and scar back in before you start stressing it too much. Otherwise, it's just going to re-tear. Occasionally, there's surgical procedures to repair it where you actually anchor the tissue back down to the bone. But either way, it can be pretty painful, especially for, pretty much anybody on the football field, because everyone's running, pushing off, digging into the ground like a lineman. And so even though it seems like a minor issue, it can actually be pretty devastating to someone's season or career if it's a lingering problem.
Well, I was going to say, it reminds me of the Boise State player, Billy Wynn, that we got from Miami. He totally separated his entire toe because of an injury similar to that. And it pretty much ended his career because he never was the same again. Remember, Ali, the Browns got him off of the injured reserve and snatched him from the Dolphins. And then he never fully recovered and was able to not plant, the same way again, or put leverage on his foot like that. So you're right. Our feet are so valuable to us, especially to a defensive lineman or, someone that's where footwork is so important. So.
Yeah. And so, as the name implies with turf toe, it is an injury that's seen more since the advent of turf or artificial grass in athletics, and especially football. And so that kind of segues into the first part of Ali's question regarding turf versus grass and injuries. And like I said, there's a lot to this debate that we could get into, but basically what it boils down to is there's been some data or some studies that have shown over the last 5 or 6 years, and even longer, that the incidence rate of injuries, non-contact injuries on synthetic surfaces like turf, is higher than on natural surfaces. Now, it's not huge. So, for example, in 2022, the rate of injuries on a synthetic surface was 0.048 per 100 player plays, but on grass, it was 0.035. And so that's a 0.013 difference. But it is statistically, that's a significant difference. Now, there's kind of two major camps that are looking at this. The NFLPA, which is obviously going to consider the players and the safety of players, right, more so than the NFL, what obviously the NFL does too. But it's pretty much always been NFLPA versus the NFL. The NFLPA is taking the stance, especially as of last year with all the other injuries that we saw, like Rodgers, that every single stadium should be grass. There should be no more synthetic field. And that was a pretty hard stance that they took. And the NFL pushes back on that, saying, the numbers can be skewed. You can kind of use them, like with any study, to support either side in a way. And they go on to say that just because there's a higher rate of injury on turf, that doesn't necessarily mean that turf is causing it. They kind of say that it's more than just the grass or the surface that they're playing on that can cause the injury. Other conditions that can impact it include weather conditions, personal fitness level, pre-existing injuries, and muscle size as well. And all of that is kind of confounding factors. So it can make studying this difficult, but it does seem peculiar that as we have played on turf more, there seem to be more injuries. We can get into some details about this. There's two different kinds of turf, monofilament and slit film. Slit film is pretty much being eliminated. There's only 3 stadiums that still have that. It's Minnesota, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati. And Minnesota and Indianapolis are replacing it this year. I don't know about Cincinnati, though. And so they're replacing that to a monofilament, which is a little bit more forgiving. But essentially what happens is grass is very Grass and dirt, it's a lot more forgiving. It moves, it gives. So there was a study where they took players' cleats, and put them on a machine and kind of like dug them into the ground. And they did it on grass and on turf. And what they saw is that on grass, every single time the cleats made a divot in the grass, kind of like, when you're golfing or if you make a hard cut on grass. Whereas in turf, they got stuck. They didn't move. They didn't create a divot. And that's where these non-contact injuries come, because the foot gets planted, gets stuck in the turf, and then their body keeps moving. And so you tear an ACL, you tear an MCL, you tear an Achilles. And that's sort of the big argument for why turf should be eliminated from all stadiums. And I know at MetLife, one of the issues was they had an even older version of turf in place that was sort of the reason for why there were so many more injuries seen at that stadium in particular. Now, apart from all of that, there's also a money discussion. As we know, money comes into play with everything, and the NFL is a money-making machine. And so some numbers I wanted to kind of present to you that just were kind of interesting and just another side of the story are regarding the cost of maintaining these things. And so it's estimated, this was an article on ESPN in October of 2023. It's estimated that a natural grass field would cost a cold weather team. So, think Cleveland, think Pittsburgh, think Green Bay, $2 million to $3 million per year to maintain it, including $400,000 each time it's replaced. And that's from a professor of turf grass research at Michigan State. Michigan State, oddly enough, is very well known for their agricultural and grass studies. Turf, on the other hand, would cost approximately $1.25 million to install and maintain. So we're talking $2 to $3 million for the maintenance, plus $400,000 every time there's a new replacement, versus $1.25 million kind of one-time cost for turf. And so obviously the NFL looks at these numbers and they think, well, let's go with the cheaper option because we want to make money. But then you kind of look at the flip side of it. And in 2026, the World Cup is coming to the United States, and many NFL stadiums are hosting games. And a very interesting thing is occurring where the NFL has said that these stadiums must change their playing surfaces to the grass that soccer players typically play on for these games, but then they plan to turn it right back to the turf that it had after these games.
Interesting.
And they're doing that because the World Cup has said, they said, if you want to host a game, you have to have this playing surface. And so the NFL is like, okay, well, we want to have the money. And so, again, it comes down to kind of an ethical, moral dilemma where they are, claiming and they're all doing things in the name of player safety. But when you kind of look at the numbers and follow the money, it doesn't necessarily seem that. Now, again, I'm not accusing the NFL of anything. I'd like to wake up tomorrow morning, Roger, so don't come down on me. But
the NFL police are outside your house in North Carolina.
Just following the evidence. It's a little skeptical in terms of, or I'm a little skeptical in terms of like what the practice is and why they're doing it. And, the NFL tends to argue against, again, those costs for replacing it. If you want to resod a field, it takes longer. You have these stadiums that are in warm weather cities, but they have domes and they're retractable roofs. But at the end of the day, our technology has improved so much so that it really isn't a concern. You can install a grass field on a Friday and play it on Sunday. It's pretty remarkable what we can do. And in Green Bay, they have a what do they call it? It's like a hybrid type of grass where they have grass, but they actually sow the grass into the surface below it. And so they take thread and they sew it down in the surface below it to help kind of solidify the connection and increase the friction between the sod and the sand beneath it, so that the grass remains even throughout. Because certainly as you run in the yard, there's bumps, there's hills, it becomes uneven. And so that's where sort of the safety issue comes into play with grass fields. But ultimately, it's a very big debate. It's a very big discussion. It's very complicated, and there's many, many facets to it. But I mean, you look purely at the raw data, it does seem to show that non-contact injuries are more common on artificial turf than on real grass. And so it's players. You look at surveys, players say they love playing on grass. They prefer grass. They may not feel as fast just because like grass is a little bit more spongy. It absorbs a little bit more. It's not propelling you. But from a safety standpoint, grass seems to take the cake from a player's perspective.
I mean, okay, you played football. Did you ever play on turf at any point in your football playing career?
Yeah, I think a handful of times I did play on turf.
I mean, I know that was a long time ago, David. You're so old now. But what was that experience like for you? Like, was it a pretty stark difference? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? I never played football. I can't speak to it, but let's talk about that a little bit. Like as a player, what's that like?
It was definitely a big difference. And I think part of it was just, I remember the first time being on a field, it was at Fremont Ross. And they had turf, and we were like, oh man, this is great. They're a big Division I program in Ohio, the biggest division. And I came from a little podunk Division IV school out in the fields. And so we had grass the entire time I was there. And so the first time I stepped foot on turf, I was almost a little bit, if you will, starstruck, just because it's like, man, this is, everyone talks about turf, and like we can't afford that at our school. And so stepping on the playing surface, you immediately notice the difference. At first glance, you think it almost feels spongy, but when you actually run and jump and have impact on it, it's stiffer, it's firmer. And certainly you do feel faster on it because, again, it's kind of propelling you. There's not as much give, and so you can get a little bit more speed. But I mean, for me, that really didn't matter. And ultimately, I didn't like it because it tears up your skin a lot more. And I didn't wear sleeves. I didn't wear, long socks or anything on my arms. And so I would come away with, turf burn or road rash. And I didn't like that aspect of it. Certainly it's a different experience, and it's, as you alluded to, it was a long time ago. And so it's hard to remember exactly the differences in what I felt. But I guess in a sense, I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, and I loved being on grass, the smell of it, getting grass stains. And if it rains and it's muddy, that's even more fun. So for me, I always enjoyed playing in the grass.
I think if you ask probably any football player, you ask any fan, you ask anybody associated with the sport, like, hey, what's your preference here? I'm almost certain that almost everybody would say grass. Like for every reason that we just listed, it's just the old school, right? That's just when you're outside playing, and like that's just the way it is. But two, it's safer. Sure, if you ask Roger Goodell what he prefers, it's the cheaper option, of course. Don't come get me, Roger. Stay away from all of us here. But if you were to ask anybody, it seems like consensus is grass is the way to go.
Yeah, it's definitely what it sounds like. And I mean, like I said, October of last year, NFLPA took a pretty firm stance and said every stadium needs to have grass. Like there's no excuse for this anymore. We look at the data, and like the NFL countered by saying, in 2021, there's no significant difference between injuries. But then in 2022, the injuries took another, I guess, lead, or there were more injuries on turf again. So it was a one-time change in the season, and then it started all over again where the injuries were higher on turf.
Yeah.
So here's a question I have for you, David. So I come at it from a different angle. So I come from a football team that I root for, that everything about them is their turf, the blue turf, right? The iconic blue turf. Everybody knows it. I say it here in town. They're like, oh yeah, the blue turf. This is what I was surprised by. I've been on that field quite a few times. The latest turf that I went on in there probably in the last year, it felt spongy, and it didn't feel like that hard contact, like, some of those traditional turfs of the past that I've been on. Like I went to one where it was like, I felt I was walking on concrete almost, right? It was very like hard contact. My question is, because I was impressed because they have little beads that go down into the turf and all that. And it's very fascinating. They actually rake it and kind of mow turf to get it ready for a game. It's crazy what they do with turf. And it actually has kind of a grass feel. Like you don't think it until you get on there. You're like, this feels like it's grass almost, right? Like the way. Yeah. So my question is, David, and I just think this is what's going to happen. So I think about it from the economics, like college football, they can't afford sometimes, let's take Division I out, but just college football teams to go out there and put that kind of grass in every single year and replace it, right? That becomes very costly for a college, for instance, let alone an NFL team, but say a college that can't afford to spend those money. Do you think, and I kind of feel this is going to happen, technology will catch up with safety issues for players? And what I mean by that, just because of just like anything in technology, medical, like you work with, turf will get to a point where it becomes safer, better, just technology will catch up to the point where they, like you said, the cleat, right? Like it digs into the grass, but it's not digging into the turf. I am in the belief technology will catch up to where it is safe, but we just aren't there yet. That's just my gut, just based on two different types of turf I've walked on in, say, 6-8 years, right? How much different turf has changed with technology. So I'm just curious, what you think in the technology standpoint for both of you, Allie and David. do you think technology can get to a point where the NFL can go, no, we confidently feel like today's standards of turf. And the reason I even went down this rabbit hole is there is a football team in Idaho where they literally put in the same turf that the Dallas Cowboys had. And it was expensive to put in, but they basically said this is going to last 8 years, right? This is going to be very economical for this high school. And a big portion of it was donated by the Dallas Cowboys. So to this high school. So I'm just curious what you think about the technology. Do you think it can come to that level? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I'll kick it off, but I mean, I have no idea. I mean, truthfully, look, I work in technology. That's my full-time job. That's what I do. I'm in innovation, product, all of that. But I don't know. I would imagine, and look, the trajectory of everything is heading that way. And we see it from everything from the safety caps to new innovation with turf. And I mean, everything that we're talking about, it seems like that's the way of the world right now, where technology is going to line with pretty much most things in our life, including safety, well-being, all of that. But I mean, I can't speak more to it than that. David, what you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is kind of the stance the NFL takes. They say while we increased the usage of artificial surfaces to play on, our technology and safety as a whole has decreased injuries across the board, or attempting to, and attempting to increase player safety with those things Ali talked about. So certainly I think that there will still be continued improvements and new renditions or refinement of artificial synthetic surfaces. However, we've also attempted to make meat in a lab synthetically, and I don't think that turned out so well. So I think science will only take us so far. As a God-fearing man, I think as much as we can be creators and innovators, we're never going to do as good as God did.
Right.
He's the one who put the grass on the earth, and so just like He made cows, it's pretty hard to make a cow in a lab. And I have no interest in lab-created meat, and so while they aren't necessarily a perfect it's not a perfect simile or comparison. I don't know. I find I will be surprised if we're able to create a surface that is as safe or so perfectly recreates what grass is like. Certainly we can get very close. And I think that they have, and they will probably get closer. And combining that with other safety implementations, it may not make a difference at some point. But I'm not sure I can confidently say that we will be able to recreate grass that's fake and it feels just like real grass.
Well, maybe we can recreate it to a point where it's nearly grass in every aspect of the imagination, but it costs significantly more than everything else that we just discussed, and it doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of things because Roger Goodell, the NFL, would simply never. So I don't know.
Ali, is Ohio State natural grass?
I don't think so.
Is it turf? Are they turf?
No, I think it's turf. Yeah.
Okay, because I thought they were. I was just because I watch them on television.
Yeah. They're turf. They're turf.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see the percentage, because you said the majority of, right? I think Dave, you said majority of NFL teams are turf. What is the percentage?
Half and half.
It's half.
Actually, it's like split right down the middle.
Okay. Interesting.
But the majority of them have switched from the slit to the monofilament turf. And I'm assuming, I'm pretty sure it's pretty much split right down the middle.
And is the monofill with the beads and stuff like that, like the blue turf? I'm assuming is okay. Yeah, because that stuff is crazy to walk on. Like you feel like you're kind of it's almost spongy when you're walking on it. It's crazy.
Yep. It is for sure, but it's still, even though it has that spongy feel, like it still has a lot more resistance when it comes to like cutting and planting and jumping. But certainly it's getting better. Kind of switching gears, just to bring it up, because I mean it is more Browns related and Cleveland relevant. I'm sure, as you all have seen or talked about, Deshaun is now throwing, so that's good that he's making progress. He's in what Stefanski called phase 2 of his rehabilitation, and so he's throwing.
And it does look like. Sorry, David, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just before we go any further, it does look like the throwing motion looks pretty natural. No hiccups, no hitch in his throwing motion or anything like that. It looks pretty good.
Yeah, and I think Stefanski said he looks like Deshaun Watson. That was his last exact words today, so that was good.
Yeah. He said, yep. He said, looks like himself. And he's in phase 2. We'll see how he does with his progress. And Watson even said that he feels like he's throwing at full speed, and Andrew Berry expects him to be ready by the start of the 2024 season. Yeah. So kind of like we talked about immediately after the injury, realizing what it was, what surgery he had. So far, he's on course to start. Typically, recovery is about 4 phases. First phase is that immediate post-op where you're just getting your range of motion back. Second phase is more strengthening and start to implement more like game stuff. Third phase will be kind of game simulation. And then phase 4 will be return to all activity, including hitting and contact. And so we still ways away before he can participate in live practice, but I mean, quarterbacks hardly do anyway. But it's very good news to see him throwing in here. It sounds like he has no, as Ali said, no hitch in his giddy up, no deficit. So all good news there so far.
So, David, let me just shift gears. There was a lot made over the last week. I can't remember the source. I think it was Score Sports or something. Got some sneak coverage of Chubb running upstairs in one of the colleges, kind of doing some high step running and stuff like that. And I know it's been all over the board. Some people say, oh, he could be back week 1, week 4, middle of the season. What do you make of all this? Because I don't think anybody really knows other than probably Nick Chubb and his team around him and his doctors. But it seems like it's wildly all over the place now because people are seeing him, doing some high step and some running and doing stuff, not contact running, but at least running, right, in some aspect. Just curious what your thoughts are, if you've seen any of that in all this where it's wildly from week 1 to misses half the season. Because that's a big variable, right? 8 to 10 weeks is a huge gap when it comes to somebody's injury. Like that's all.
It is. And I mean, all that is speculation. I mean, it's armchair doctors. It's right. I found the video on Reddit.
I'm talking about where he's up there like high steps. Yeah.
He's up on on an indoor track and kind of doing some high steps. And I made the error of reading the comments, and that's why I laughed a little bit when you were talking about it, because one of them says still looks faster than Najee Harris, and then the very next one said, bro looks like he's running with bullet nuts. So that one gave me a little chuckle. But I mean, in terms of what he's actually doing, if he's doing some drills or he's kind of high stepping, kind of working on his length of his strides.
Yeah.
And so I imagine this is part of his ACL rehabilitation program. Obviously regular straight line running is the first step, but then doing a little bit more variation in your strides, which can help work on different, like phases or zones of running. And whether it's, high step into avoid tacklers diving behind you or jumping over someone, he's probably just kind of doing some running drills. Now we got a 7-second glimpse of it, but I'm sure that entire workout or session he was probably doing regular jogging, doing some high knee running like that, maybe doing some kind of kickback running, and different variations on running just to get his body and his knee used to it, right. Retraining his knee and his mind how to run and use that new ACL and MCL. And so, again, it's all speculation at this point. I know we've talked about it a lot, but it looks like he is on track and he's making the progress he needs to. Currently we're at May and his surgery was in November, I think. And so we're 6 months out. And so anywhere from another 3 to 6 months is kind of the anticipated recovery from a straightforward basic ACL. And so when we're looking at a second or third ACL with another ligament, typically goes out a little bit longer than that. I tell most of my patients your recovery is going to be extended just because you had more done. But sometimes, many times I'm surprised. Some people do much better than expected or do worse than expected. And so him running and doing sort of different variations of running is definitely an encouraging sign. We've got 3.5 months until the season starts. I still don't expect to see him suited up for week 1. I think he'll be close.
That was going to be my question. Is it even realistic to even see him week 1? Right. Yeah.
I mean, he'll be right at the 9 or 10 month mark. And so I think if it is like, if I were a betting man, I would not bet on it. I cannot, I have a hard time believing that he'll be ready week 1 to be go full go. I would think sometime in October is a little bit more realistic of a time frame.
Okay.
So more like that 4-week time frame. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, 4, 5, 6 weeks maybe. Certainly, I would be surprised if we didn't see him before the bye. The bye is week 10, and so that puts, when is that? That's in November. And so we
Right.
should be able
Yeah.
to see him prior to that. But if he's kind of close, kind of teetering, not really quite sure, they may just wait until after the bye to make sure he has another week or so to recover. So
Well,
anything's possible at this point still.
and it does work in the Browns' favor. I mean, if you're looking at the schedule, right? You open, let's just look at the first 4 games. You've got the Cowboys, Jags, Giants, and Raiders. I mean, 2 of those 4 teams are going to be pretty competitive, right? In the Cowboys and the Jags. Some giant question marks surrounding the Raiders and the Giants. I mean, both teams at Cannon will beat you, of course, but you feel much better about, Jags, Giants, Raiders, Commanders than you do
Sure.
Ravens, Steelers, Broncos, Dolphins. Well, exclude Broncos, Dolphins, Chiefs. Ravens again. So you want to have them towards the end of the season. So it does kind
absolutely.
of work in the Browns' favor.
Well,
if there's any time you want Chubb back for this season, it's definitely that kind of last third stretch run where you got 2 Thursday night games in a month's time, and all these divisional opponents, and and you got the Chiefs too, and like you said, so all works in their favor, especially kind of for his timeline, and maybe a blessing in the skies to get him back at the right time. But that all remains to be seen at this point.
I think it would be poetic if he comes back to start against the Steelers. That would be poetic for him to come back and start against, kind of like a little bit of a revenge game. But you're right. I mean, this team went, they went to the playoffs last year minus Nick Chubb. So, Al, you bring up a good point. Those first 4 games isn't a gauntlet, but, there's winnable games on that schedule. And if you get him back week 5 or 6, you're sitting in a good spot, right? And you're looking at a good, 1-2 punch with Ford and Chubb at that point. So I think that'd be a good place for the Browns to be. But again, I don't know. I have this weird feeling he could come out week 1 or 2, but that's just me. I think it's crazy to think that, but just the way
if anybody can do it, it's Nick Chubb, right?
To me, it's because of his mental capacity, right? Like this is a guy that he defies the odds of anything. He reminds me a lot of what happened to Adrian Peterson. You thought he was never going to play football again, and then he goes out and ends up having one of his best, years after
his best season.
After a traumatic injury, right? And here's the truth. Nick Chubb has had nothing to focus on except rehabbing and better his game in the offseason, where he has had nothing else to focus on. So,
I mean, if there's anybody who's going to recover from it and do the unimaginable and essentially do a miracle, it's going to be Nick Chubb. I mean, he's got that dog in him to do that. So
don't bet against Batman.
Definitely. David, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on as always. I love doing this.
Go Browns.
Go Browns.
Go Browns.
That is Dr. David Ullery. A lot of good stuff there. Just real quick, we want to tell you about our friends over at the Hartville Flea Market, Marketplace and Flea Market. Guys, they've got it all. They've been named one of the top 20 flea markets in the United States, Flea Market Insiders. You've got the outdoor flea market that's over 80 years old. They've got 12 acres of outdoor vendor space. So go check them out and also step on inside because they've got over 3 acres of indoor shopping, 50 unique shops. They've got food. They've got antiques. They've got consignment. They've got everything you could possibly need. So be sure to go check them out at Hartville Marketplace and Flea Market. All right. And let's wrap up with our last version of Did Andrew Berry Get It Right? And we're going to start with the 2022 season. So let's kick it off with the first pick, number 68 overall. This was MJ Emerson, who's been an absolute bright spot of this Browns young defense. 4 interceptions, 122 tackles, 29 passes defensed, 1 sack, 2 TFLs during his time with the Cleveland Browns. And shortly after that, at number 81 overall, the Giants select Cordell Flott, who had 1 interception, 62 tackles, 7 passes defensed, and 2 forced fumbles. Long story short, Andrew Berry knocked this one out of the park. MJ Emerson was clear and obvious pick. He has been, like I said, an absolute bright spot in this Browns defense. I just want to take a look at some of the corners that were taken after him. I mean, you've got Kobe Bryant that Seattle selected there. The other one that would be, if you could probably do this again at number 153 overall, Seattle also took Tariq Woolen, who has been freaking awesome. So yes, if you look at the, directly after Martin Emerson, who was selected. AB absolutely got it right, but Reek Woolen also on the board there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think absolutely for where he got him in the draft. They always do the redo drafts, right? Like where this guy would have landed if it was like the ultimate draft. Mm-hmm. They had MG Emerson as a first-round draft pick, period, when they redid the draft. So I think Andrew Berry got a ton of value in this pick and really took advantage of not having a first-round draft pick, but really drafting a first-round draft pick caliber player, right? So that was one. Sure. I mean, if I look at like some of the draft picks that stand out to me, this one is one of those, right? Where he actually went out, got a guy that was of value and got even more upside than what he was probably believing he was getting at that position and what that player turned into. So.
Well, that's what he had to do at this, time when you don't have first round picks. You have to draft, second, third, fourth, fifth round players that are first round caliber players. You have to find those diamonds in the rough, if you will. And Andrew Berry is really good at that, as you can see. Yeah. Number 78 overall. This is where they went defensive end. They got Alex Wright, who has had 2 forced fumbles, 7 passes defensed, 5 sacks, 53 tackles, 8 TFLs, and 5 QB hits in his time with the Cleveland Browns. And shortly after him, D'Angelo Malone by the Falcons was drafted at number 82 overall. He's had 1 sack, 35 tackles, 4 TFLs. So did Andrew Berry get this one right? Yes. Alex Wright has had 5 sacks. Again, 53 tackles, 8 TFLs, 5 QB hits. Now, he's a rotational piece. The Browns go out, they trade for Zadarius Smith. At that time, they had Jadeveon Clowney. Yep. Alex Wright was not drafted to be the starter opposite of Myles Garrett. Now, has he been thrust into those positions from time to time? Yes. And he's been serviceable in that role. But that's not who he was drafted to be. And I will say, who he was drafted to be, he's a pretty good version of that. So I will say, yes, Andrew Berry got this one right.
I agree. Like I said, you're right. At the time, we had Clowney. And those folks, he was not drafted to be the next starter. And I think this guy, based on what he was asked to do, fit the slot in the time frame of when he was actually drafted.
Yep. All right. Next up, number 99 overall. The Browns select David Bell, the receiver out of Purdue. During his time with the Cleveland Browns, 38 receptions for 381 yards, 3 touchdowns with a 65.5% catch percentage. At number 105, the 49ers selected Danny Gray. Now, Danny's battled some injuries. He has only had 7 targets for 1 reception. So, did Andrew Berry get this one right? The answer here is yes. But let's take a look at some of the receivers that were taken after our guy David Bell. Danny Gray went shortly after. This is where Green Bay Packers select Romeo Doubs, who's had a very, very good career, over 1,000 yards in his young career. Khalil Shakir also went. Dustin, you know him very well. He's got over 772 yards. There was some other ones here that probably at this point would have been a better fit. But again, we are just looking at the player that was drafted directly after this player. So in this context, did Andrew Berry get it right? Yes, he did.
Yeah, he did. And here's the thing. I think this is going to be a make or break year for Bell in the Browns offense, with the addition of Jerry Jeudy and Tillman and these guys. I mean, he's really going to have to find his place on this roster. He could be a casualty. We don't know, right, when it comes to the final roster and how this all shakes out at the end of training camp. Yep.
Next up on the list, this is a really difficult one to talk about who won in this sense. At number 108 overall, the Browns draft Perrion Winfrey, who's had, as you know, a lot of off-field issues. He's not currently on an NFL team. However, during his time with the Browns, if you remember, he was a first-round caliber talent, but fell due to his off-the-field issues. Had a decent, statistical career with the Browns before his release. 25 tackles, half a sack, 1 TFL, 1 QB hit. In the role that he was playing, right? So that was 108. At 116 is Ioma Uwazuriki by the Broncos, who has been suspended indefinitely for gambling. So I really, both of these, I think both teams just got it wrong. I don't think that there's a team here. You can't say Andrew Berry got this one right. I think both of these teams just got it wrong. I think both can be wrong in this instance.
Well, and I got to tell you, obviously there was character issues with Perrion Winfrey, and we knew that going in. But man, I got to tell you, based on the player this kid was in college, I actually had some aspirations for this guy that he could be that nasty guy on defense and channel his, anger on the football field. And it just unfortunately never panned out. But I think this was one of those we'll look back on. I mean, not as bad as Josh Gordon, but what are those what if kind of moments with this guy had all the talent in the world. Just off-field issues became a distraction, unfortunately.
So another rough one here. He is now back with the Browns, but at number 124, this is where the Browns drafted Cade York. 32 attempts for 24 made, so 24 of 32 with a 75% field goal percentage. No other kicker was taken, so we cannot compare him to anybody else. But I will mention some notable players that were drafted after Cade York: Romeo Doubs, Khalil Shakir, and Tariq Woolen. Some very good football players that were drafted after.
I said the Browns needed to draft Shakir, and nobody listened.
So again, now Cade York back on the practice squad, another leg in training camp or OTAs at this point. So we'll see if he remains, if he can provide some competition, with the special teams unit. It'll be interesting to see. But if Andrew Berry could have this one back, I think he would. I think he would do something differently here. So I will say he did not get this one right.
All right. No, he did not. And what's interesting is, after the first year, you would have thought he got it right. That's the weird thing.
Yes.
After the first year, you would have 100%. Everybody would have literally said, "Yeah, they got it right." He won the game-winning field goal in Carolina. All those things magically happened, and then it just went. Well, we know this. The whole temperamental of a kicker is a whole nother. You could do a whole show on, the inner thinkings of a kicker in the NFL. But it's unfortunate.
Unfortunate on that one. Okay, next up, running back. At number 156, the Browns select Jerome Ford out of Cincinnati. Rushing, his stats are 212 carries for 828 yards and 4 touchdowns. Receiving, 44 catches for 319 yards and 5 touchdowns. Now, that was at 156. Jerome Ford's been good for the Browns. I wouldn't say he's been anything more than that. I think he's who we expected him to be. I think you had hoped maybe for a little bit more, but he's the player that he was at Cincinnati, and this is who he is. I think that we have seen the ceiling of Jerome Ford, and it's good. He's a good football player.
He's a serviceable running back in the NFL.
Serviceable running back. And if you look at the next running back that was selected, it's a tough pill to swallow because they selected Kyron Williams, who has been second team All-Pro. He was a Pro Bowler. For rushing, he had 263 carries for 1,283 yards and 12 touchdowns. Receiving, 41 catches for 282 yards and 3 touchdowns. So did Andrew Berry get this one right? Unfortunately, he did not.
Yeah, and so for me, I think he got it right. And this is where I'll just differ a little bit. And the only reason I think he got this right was because of what Jerome Ford's job was with the Browns, right? I mean, obviously the other one went to the Pro Bowl, but I think based on where he was drafted, I think we got it right for the player. But at the end of the day, yes, the other guy was better, like overall. But it'd be interesting to see where these guys' longevity in their career kind of go.
I'm curious. What do you mean by that? I mean, he was drafted at 156. Kyron Williams was drafted at 164. He was drafted after Jerome Baker.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is I think it's kind of an incomplete. Yeah, I'm just saying I think it's an incomplete picture at this point. And I guess where I'm kind of going with this as well is you had, Ford, was in the shadows of Nick Chubb. So he didn't also probably get the opportunities that this other, running back that Nick Chubb got. So I think
that's not true. So, I mean, Jerome Ford, this was his year. He was the go-to back. And same with Kyron Williams. I mean, prior to Kyron Williams, I mean, he was behind Cam Akers, and that didn't work out. He goes to Minnesota. I mean, it's a very, very similar comparison.
Right.
I would say. So, I mean, when you and look, I'm not bashing Jerome Ford by any stretch of the imagination, but when you look at a very similar trajectory and attempts and number just of carries here, I mean, Jerome Ford, 212. So that's 212 is what Jerome had for 825 yards, versus Kyron Williams 263 for 1283 and 12 touchdowns. I mean, it's a pretty
and I guess where I kind of weigh that is you had Ford last year and you had Kareem Hunt, right? I think what did Kareem get, 4 or 5 touchdowns on the year? So you kind of have that, it's a little different because you have, Kareem Hunt's kind of thrown into that mix as well. What would be interesting is, because I think it's just incomplete. And based on how long Nick Chubb's going to be out, I guess, there is no Kareem Hunt this year, right? I mean, Ford's the guy until Nick Chubb comes back. It'd be interesting to kind of look at these guys through like week 4 or 5 when Nick Chubb comes back and see where they're at, like, in a true stats. Because I think Kareem kind of throws a wrinkle into that just a little bit, just because he was put on goal line position, to get the ball in the end zone and stuff like that. So it's just a little of a tweak. So I think we got it right, but it's also hard to judge based on this, the way the season played out, and you thrust Kareem Hunt in there, and then all of a sudden, he's not getting, he's getting the divided carries now a little bit. So it's hard for me to look at that, right? Like from a subjective, at least last season.
Okay. At number 202, the Browns draft Michael Woods. He had 5 receptions for 45 yards, no touchdowns, with a 50% catch percentage. At number 229, drafted by Seattle, is Bo Melton. He did not make the cut. However, he did sign with the Packers, and he went 16 for 218, 1 touchdown with a 66.7 catch percentage. I will say Andrew Berry did not get this one right. While he did not make the team of his the draft, the team that drafted him, signs with the Packers, has a pretty decent season or a young career with them. 16 for 218, 1 touchdown with a 66.7 catch percentage. Now Mike Woods has battled injury, but again, just going off of stats alone, and it's pretty black and white here. Your on the field production, I got to give it to Bo Melton here.
I agree. And I tell you what's interesting about this particular player. I think if you remember a show I talked about late summer last year, I said Woods was catching everything at training camp. Remember, I said he looked really good. He looked solid at training camp, and he looked like the player that could maybe go to that next level. And that just didn't materialize. It did not materialize onto the field. So I do think Andrew Berry got this wrong, because what I saw in training camp did not translate to the regular season in the football games. So. Mm-hmm.
All right, next up, I agree. Next up, 223, the Browns draft Isaiah Thomas, signed to the Browns practice squad. He recorded 9 tackles and 1 sack. Shortly after, at 235, the Rams draft Daniel Hardy. He's recently been signed to the Bears practice squad. He's recorded 4 tackles. I mean, look, when you get to this point in the draft, it's really difficult to hit on much of anything.
Right.
I would say, I guess based off of these stats alone, like the Browns got it right. But at this point, it's really kind of a shot in the dark. So statistically, yes, Browns got this one right. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they got it right too. And you're right, Allie. When you get to this point of the draft and that fringe part of the draft, you could have undrafted free agents make a roster spot over a late round draft pick that just got overlooked for whatever reason. And they had the talent, and I used DeAnthony Bell as that example, right? He was a kid that was undrafted free agent and then makes such an impact with the Browns, you know what I mean? And he, beat out other guys that got drafted, So it's like, so it's interesting how that all works out.
Okay, and we're going to wrap up with this one. At 246, the Browns draft Dawson Deaton. He was the last interior offensive lineman taken, so nobody to compare him to. He has since been waived by the Cleveland Browns, so he is no longer with the team. Hard to say that the Browns got this one wrong, right? He's no longer with the team, but it was one of the last selections in the draft, so kind of a shot in the dark. So I'm not going to hold him to it. I will say that Dawson Deaton, he did survive the Browns cuts for several years, kind of up and down, on and off the practice squad. So he did serve as kind of a depth piece, but really, really hard to tell with that one.
Yeah, I would say the Browns got this right just based on that thing what you just pointed out there alone. The fact that he was able to stay on the roster and be a serviceable guy to give reps to the football team. I think that's kind of where you draft this guy at, right? That late in the round, he's not going to be a starter unless, God forbid, multiple people go down, possibly. So, I think they got it right here because he actually was able to stay on the team, right? It's kind of like, okay, you actually we drafted you and we wanted you to be one of the 54 or practice squad guys. So yeah, I think they kind of basically got this one right, in my opinion. But.
Yeah. I think it's fine. All right. There you have it. That is wrapping that up. Did Andrew Berry get it right? We did 2020 through 2022. The reason that we're going to stop there is because it's just too hard to tell from last year's draft, right?
Yeah,
we got to let these guys get some reps in. I mean, we could kind of maybe one of these shows do a little bit of it and just take a look at some of the picks that were or selections that were picked after some of our guys, but it's still hard to tell with these young careers, but we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Yeah, go ahead, Dustin.
I just say, Al, it'd be kind of fun, for a future show, just throwing it out there. Maybe we could do like the spotlight of 2023. What was the guy on the roster from that draft that really was the spotlight that, elevated his game and became like the bright spot in the entire draft for the Browns? That'd be kind of fun to take the guy and pull him out and kind of do a little more emphasis on why he was the guy, the best guy, no matter where he was in the draft first. That'd be kind of fun.
All right. Yeah, we can explore anything. It's the off season. We've got nothing but time on our hands.
June and July, baby. These are the filler shows. We have fun. Some of our best shows are filler shows because you never know what you're going to get.
You never know what you're going to get. But we are running over a little bit. So we appreciate everybody for sticking around, for tuning in. Thanks to our sponsors. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Stay safe, stay healthy. And as always, Browns fans, go Browns.